And I want to talk in the last 10 minutes or so, because I want to leave a lot of room for Q&A. I want to talk about two hotspots and one big power. Because I said that marching armies were not the problem. We had essentially believed that we had done away with great power rivalry. That was something of the past. And lo and behold, we see today that we are dealing with great power rivalry and regional rivalries that really I studied about in graduate school as if they belonged to the 19th century. I'll turn to China in a minute, but remember, there's Russia. Russia is a declining power, of course. When is the last time you bought anything made in Moscow that wasn't from petroleum? And don't say vodka, because that would be France these days. The Russian economy is on a good day sort of the size of the economy of the Netherlands, and it depends very much on what the price of oil is. 80% of Russian exports are in oil, gas, and minerals. This is not a modern economy. There are pockets in Russia of modern economy. It is one of the places where you have the best software engineers and the best mathematicians. I remember wanting to say, though, to President Dmitry Medvedev, when he made his visit to the Silicon Valley in his jeans and his Armani jacket and read his speech off of an iPad, looked every bit the young entrepreneur, by the way. But I wanted to say to him, yes, you have the best software engineers and mathematicians. Unfortunately, they're all working in Palo Alto and Tel Aviv. And so the Russian economy is not an economy that supports a great power, but the Russian military, that's a different matter. You have, with Vladimir Putin, will to rebuild some semblance of Russian power in the world. And if it means propping up Bashar al-Assad in Syria, if it means, what are the Russians doing with Maduro in Venezuela? We will use what we have to disrupt and to use our military power to show that we're still there. But Russia is a declining power. You are seeing, by the way, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks once again in a kind of regional rivalry in the Mediterranean. This again is stuff that those of us who studied international politics thought we'd left alone in the 19th century. And I can guarantee you, when I was Secretary of State, I didn't think this was something I was going to have to worry about. Now, the other great power rivalry, the other great power adversary, of course, is not a declining power. We talk about China as a rising power. I want to say it is a risen power. China has arrived. Now, there is great frustration and disappointment with this fact. And the reason for that is that China's rise was largely fueled by decisions of the international community, including, most importantly, the United States, to take the opening that Deng Xiaoping gave and integrate China into the international economy. And it was integrated, by the way, more quickly than it probably should have been, because when China acceded, for instance, to the WTO, it had not conformed its national legislation or its national practices with WTO standards. I can remember having to go and say to Vladimir Putin, who said to me, I don't understand. China is not nearly as far along in terms of intellectual property protection, in terms of laws about that, than we are. And I wanted to say, well, Mr. President, that's because your economy doesn't matter and their economy does. But I was Secretary of State, I'm polite, one would never say that. But that's the truth of it. China was integrated quickly because people saw this freight train coming down the track, and they said better in than out. But everybody who adopted that integrationist narrative assumed that China would conform its practices to international standards, that it would protect intellectual property, that it would open its markets, that it would not privilege national champions over foreign competition, that it would not manipulate its currency. There were even those who assumed that as China liberalized economically, it would liberalize politically. And everybody assumed in 1997, when when Britain handed over Hong Kong to China, that they would live up to the pledge of one country, two systems. The fact that that has not happened now, and that instead you've gotten exactly the economic practices of economic nationalism, that the Hong Kong bargain has been broken, that China has used its moment to build its military forces in ways that look like it intends to push the United States out of the Asia Pacific, that has now led to great disappointment. If you add to that under Jiang Zemin of Hu Jintao, with Chinese presidents that I dealt with, the Chinese did something called hide and bide, was the way. We'll just bide our time. You used to say to the Chinese leadership, oh, come on, you're a big power, help us here. And they'd say, no, 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 have you been to Western China? We're just a developing country. Well, Xi Jinping comes to power, and that's not the narrative. The narrative is China has arrived, China will supplant everybody else, China will unify all of its parts, and oh, by the way, China will surpass the United States in frontier technologies like AI and quantum computing. A direct challenge in the South China Sea, a direct challenge in building up islands that are claimed by others, a reversal of many of the policies that their predecessors had pursued quietly and allowed to happen, and again, it's led to disappointment. The problem is disappointment isn't a policy. And so trying to figure out precisely how to respond to this China is probably the most important strategic issue that the United States faces. The United States has some real assets at its disposal. The first is that we have allies. China has clients. I mentioned the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Australians, a budding relationship with India. One of the things that made the Chinese very nervous was the Quad, because the idea of India, Japan, and Australia with the United States to challenge Chinese power, the Chinese can read that. When it comes also to the Pacific Fleet, it is still the dominant force in the region, and it will be our fault if we allow it not to be over time. The Chinese have mobilized the United States to do what's called the Endless Frontiers Act, bipartisan support in Congress, for federal support for those technologies and the development of those technologies like AI and quantum computing. They have stimulated the United States after COVID to think about the return of supply chains to the United States. Particularly, we learned we were very dependent on China for pharmaceuticals. So the Chinese have provoked a response. And there's one other thing to remember, which is that China has its own problems. Not only do they have a growing problem between the elites and those people out in the fields, but they have a demographic bow wave coming at them. You know, sometimes people have what I'll call authoritarian envy. Oh, they build great airports. Oh, they get things done. These messy democracies, they can't do anything. But when authoritarians do things, they do them efficiently, even if the policies are wrong. And the great example of this is the one-child policy in China, carried out efficiently, even brutally, and now 34 million Chinese men don't have mates. Because out in the countryside, if you were going to have one child, you wanted a boy. And a lot of girls disappeared. And they've, in rapid succession, changed one-child policy to two-child policy to three-child policy to have as many kids as you want. Because they see that China has gotten old before it's gotten rich. So we should not overestimate China, but we should also recognize that it is not like the threat from the Soviet Union. This is the first time in our international history that we have a fully integrated adversary into the international economy who does not share our values, does not share our system, and has great economic power. The Russians, even at the height, the Soviet Union was a military giant, it was a technological midget. That is not true of China. Now, I go at some length about China because we are seeing now from the Chinese a real challenge.